Certo, então estamos ao vivo aqui, né? Pessoal, obrigado aí para quem já está presente vendo a gente no YouTube, né? Estamos aqui então com o professor João Paulo Flores, professor assistente então de agricultura de precisão da Universidade Estadual da Dakota do Norte, né? O professor aí aceitou o nosso convite e agradeço até esse momento por estar aqui conosco, né? E lembrando a todos aí, então, que a nossa apresentação será em inglês, tá? E o professor irá nos apresentar, então, sobre o uso de drones para o controle de daninhas nas implantações de milho, tá? Então, assim que vocês forem, com a apresentação for indo, eu peço que vocês coloquem essas perguntas no chat e depois, também no fim, iremos abrir um espaço para isso, tá? Agora eu já falei em português, irei então falar em inglês assim, rapidinho. Professor, thank you so much for for being here with us. We appreciate that you accepted our invitation, and hopefully we can make this uh, partnership, let's say it, we extended not only today but uh, for other times, other days. But thank you so much for being here. And uh, just like I said in Portuguese, we will have a space for questions after the lecture. But the show is yours. You can present yourself, start the lecture, be free.
All right. Thank you, Guillermo, for the introduction. Thanks, everyone, for being here and for the opportunity. I really appreciate that. So, just to clarify things, I of course perfectly understand Portuguese. I don't speak Portuguese very often. My wife is American. My son is American. I speak English all day long, so I have a really hard time to keep up a conversation in Portuguese. And I tried before to give a talk in Portuguese for a group of students here on campus. And towards the middle of the talk, I had to switch to English because I couldn't keep up speaking Portuguese. So that's the reason why my slides are in English and I will be speaking in English. So just a brief introduction about myself. I had my undergrad from Federal University of Santa Maria and my master's and PhD from Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul. And I've been in the West since 2009, and since 2019, I'm being an assistant professor in precision ag at North Dakota State University. So just to start here, so just to provide a little background where I am located at. So I'm located in Fargo, North Dakota, right here. We're probably around 2 hours south of the border of Canada, to give you an idea where we are. So if you zoom in on the state of North Dakota, the North Dakota State University has 7 different research centers located across the state. The project that we'll be talking about today was carried out, and it's being carried out at the Carrington Research Extension Center, located in Carrington, North Dakota. And I want to start with why we're doing this project. What is the motivation behind it? Since we have start flying drones in North Dakota in the US, so around 2014, 2015, we've been talking about this, the use of these images to create prescription maps and allow site-specific weed control for crops. So I decided some time ago to take that in and, and looking at how we could implement this in corn. And why corn? Couple reasons. So in North Dakota, we have around 3.5 million acres of corn planted every year. It's a big chunk of our economy. In corn, usually you have two occasions when you do weed control. The first one is an application at pre-emergence, and the second one around V4 or V5, where they're kind of taking care of those skips that happen on the first application. And the cost of this second application is around $15 to $20 an acre. And I think there is where we can use drone imagery then to create some site-specific weed control. And to give you an idea, if you take in consideration this 3.5 million acres and multiply that by either $15 or $20 an acre, we can estimate savings in around $5.2 to $7 million per year if you reduce the application or herbicide in 10% of the acreage in corn. But as we will see here, those numbers can be much higher. When it comes to the use of a US imagery for site-specific weed control, if you look in the literature, a lot of that it's based on determining what is the weed, what is the crop, and create maps of the weeds, but they stop right there. There is no application of that using the map to go ahead and apply the herbicide in the field. So this is one of the things that makes this project a little different. We're not just creating the map, but we're going all the way through and applying the herbicide. The other thing that makes this project kind of unique is that a lot of the approach for mapping weeds from imagery, people are trying to identify weed species, and they're looking, 3, 4, 5 different species. And the approach that we're taking here, I'm actually looking for the corn, because it's only one species that I have to identify, and it grows in a row. If you think about this from the perspective to create some sort of classification to identify what is corn and what's not, it's a much easier task than you try to separate 5 different weed species. And the third aspect that makes this kind of a little different from most of the research out there is that we work in a relatively large area, around 40 acres of land. And we go beyond the mapping, as I mentioned. We use the imagery that we collect, and we created this map, and we're using this map and pushing the map to a commercial sprayer in a way that the sprayers go down in doing this site-specific weed control. So we have two kind of objectives on this project, and as we'll talk later, we're kind of going to expand a little bit more on those objectives. The first one was to use the imagery from the UAVs to quantify the weed infestation in corn. So what you're seeing here on your screen, each of these cells is a grid of 10 feet by 10 feet, roughly 3 by 3 meters. And the cells in green means basically they didn't have any weeds, so they were not sprayed. And the cells in red, they were sprayed. So that's what we're trying to create. Created this weed map from the imagery. And on top of that, again, we just want to use this map as a base and create a prescription map that we can push to the sprayer and have the sprayer spray in the field. So how do we go about this? And that's what I'm going to try to walk you through here. Couple things that I want to mention. What you're trying to do here, it's kind of reaching for the lower hanging fruit. Mainly, we're trying to do something that's what I see is the easiest thing to implement. So for me, the easiest thing to implement is that's a weed as a weed and needs to be sprayed. So I don't try to separate the weed species, and that's what allows me to tackle the project looking at the corn and separating the corn from the weed. Everything that's left in the field are weeds, and we spray that. The proposed approach, we focus, as I mentioned, on post-emergence weed control in corn because it doesn't make for us any sense to try to do this before pre-emergence. And we are not trying to change the rates across the boom on the sprayer. What we're trying to do is only turning nozzles on and off based on the fact if that you have weeds or not. That's all that we're trying to do. And how do we go about that? The first thing that we do is to fly the field with some of our UAVs. And for this project, we select the Phantom 4 RTK and the Matrice 600 Pro because it can carry a larger, heavier payload. Excuse me. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with drones. So the Phantom 4 RTK is fairly easy to carry around. It has a very good accuracy down to 2 centimeters when you're connected to a RTK network. It has a 20 megapixel RGB camera that produces fairly nice quality orthomosaics. One thing is that we have usually to fly this at 120 feet above ground. In that results in less acres covered per flight. So, but we don't need to pre-process the data before stitching. We can just pull the images from the SD card and put that into Pix4D, for example, and stitch from there. The 600 Pro system that we have is a more customized system, is a heavier drone. You need kind of 2 people to carry it around. It has a PPK system, meaning that you have to pulse correct the data to get the same accuracy than the RTK. And that can be something, it takes a little bit of time. It has a 42 megapixel camera on it, and that's what allows us to fly at 350 feet to get to the same image quality resolution that we would get with the Phantom 4 at 120 feet. So my thoughts when we got this is, okay, flying at 350 feet, we can fly faster, can cover more acres. This is going to be great. The camera, the surprise was the camera is so good. The images are so big in size that we actually have to slow the drone down to allow the pictures to be saved in the SD card. And at the end of the day, what that does is that time-wise, there's very little difference between the two to cover the same area. But the image quality that we get from this system is much better. It has a much larger sensor, gets much more light into it. So this is the kind of image that we get from the system. So this was flown, I believe, in June 14 at 350 feet. Because we are so zoomed out, you cannot see many details. You can identify a few things here. The center pivot tracks, some weed patches, some trees. If you zoom in this kind of imagery, so this line here, just for you to have an idea, this is 7 meters. And this is the kind of resolution that you can see on the picture from 350 feet when you zoom in. And this is what allows us to kind of figure out the rows and the weeds and separate them out. So this area, it's around 42, 45 acres. And I have one of my graduate students working his master's on this thesis on this. So we have to come up with a kind of trial experiment so we can do some statistics here. So what we're doing, we're basically comparing the blanket application versus site-specific weed control. By blanket application, I mean you go out in the field, turn the nozzles on your sprayer, and drive all the way throughout the field with the nozzles always on. That's what we do here. So how does that compare when we turn the nozzles on just where we have weeds? That's the comparison that we're trying to do here. And for this, we have 2, 4, 6 reps of each treatment, and the plot size are 400 feet by 136.6 feet, which is the boom width of the sprayer that we have on hand to do this kind of work. Just to give an idea, if we go back and zoom on this plot here, I just changed the color to black because green, it just becomes kind of hurt your eyes in the close. But what we had to do here this season, when I started working with this project, my idea was to have cells that were 10 by 10 feet wide. And the reason for that, 10 by 10 feet wide, we are covering 4 rows of corn. And what that does is, when you're looking for weeds between the rows, even if you get rid of the corn and the weeds that are between the corn rows, because you're covering 4 rows and we're spraying based on a cell, even those weeds inside of the row, they get sprayed. But we tried to do this past season, and for some reason, the pre-emergence weed treatment on this field was poor, very poor. There was a huge infestation of weeds, and when we tried to do the 10 by 10 foot cell, it came out that we would have to spray like 95% of the field, which doesn't make any sense to do that. So what we did, we decided to take full advantage of the sprayer that has individual nozzle control. And the nozzles, they are spaced 1.64 feet or half meters apart or 20 inches apart. And that's what you see here. Each of these cells, they are 1.64 feet by 10 feet. Okay. So our approach, it starts with for RGB imagery, just like this. And as I said, I'm looking for the corn because the corn grows in a row, and I can easily identify that. So the first thing that we do as we work on this, we used an index, excess green, to kind of segment out the vegetation fraction from the rest of the background. Okay, that's the first step. Once we do that, and this is some of the stuff that my graduate student is working on, is he came up with an algorithm that identified the rows that's somewhat a little different from what has been published. So he is looking to see if that's something that can be patented or protected. So that's one of the reasons that I'm not going to go in very many details regarding that here. Once we detect the rows, the next step is that we create a buffer around the row. So imagine the corn is growing, a couple inches in each side of the center of the row. So we create a buffer around the row, and we basically delete everything under that buffer because we assume that is only the corn plants. And when you do that, you end up with something like this. So now you can see the weeds and the corn on this image. And it was a saying, if you look at here, if you had a 10 by 10 cell size here, that we would cover this 3 or 4 rows, even we know that there are weeds where we delete the corn, because there are more weeds between the rows, this whole thing would be sprayed. So that way we're taking care of the weeds between the rows and the weeds between the rows that are inside between plants in the row. So that's pretty much how we separate the weeds from the corn. And once we have that, and all of that is done using some Python scripts and ArcGIS tools, if you guys are familiar with those things. So if you're not, I really would encourage you, if this is something that interests you, to look into those things. GIS is the core of precision ag per se. And Python allows you to automate so many things. Two things that I really encourage students to look deeper into it. So once we have this shape file in ArcGIS, basically mapping where we have weeds and we have not, we can export this to another piece of software. I don't know if you guys are familiar for AgSMS, but this is basically a software that kind of does the interface between writing data and read the data from agricultural equipment. So once we bring this into ArcGIS and we say, I want to export, AgSMS, I want to export this for my sprayer. So he puts in the right formats and with the right folder structure, makes things much easier. And at this point, we were pretty much, ready to go and spray in the field. But there are quite a few challenges that we have to overcome to do this. I'm trying to do this for the last 3-4 years. And this past season was the first time that we were able to do it, because it has certain requirements that the sprayer has to meet to allow this to happen. And we are using, brand new sprayers, 2021 models, and this AIM command flags equipped here. AIM command flags is a system that comes from factory and basically it has all the hardware installed in the sprayer that allows you to get individual nozzle control over, I think it's 82 nozzles that you have across the sprayer. So, but to get that level of control, the individual nozzles, there are a couple things. There is one specific monitor or cab computer that can do that, and that would be a Viper 4 Pro. Just to add this to the system is around $8,000. On top of that, you have 2 unlocks, and those unlocks they will cost you another $9,000 or so. So, and you never knew this until you start doing this kind of thing. So, but once you have that all in place, it works quite well, and we are very grateful to the dealership in town that we work with. They were able to, they had a Viper 4 Pro, and they were able to make arrangements where we got those 2 unlocks. That was some big savings there, and we're very grateful for that. Just to give you an idea, what would it cost if you're looking to buy a new sprayer, between what are the costs of a sprayer that's capable to do this and one that's not? You're probably looking roughly 10% more. So roughly $500,000 for a sprayer. I'm not sure how much of those would cost in Brazil, but they're expensive. So one last thing that we have, one last challenge is the speed that you can operate the sprayer when you're trying to do this. And that is that's because of the GPS refreshing rate. So the GPS receiver on this sprayer, it has a refreshing rate of 10 hertz, meaning it refreshes position 10 times a second. So on this table, you can see you have several numbers here. But I want to call your attention to this. Under the speed in 12 miles per hour, that's usually the speed that farmers are spraying. Turning nozzles on 12 miles an hour and drive across the field. Talking with the Case age and engineers, they told us that we probably don't want to push these above 7 miles per hour because the computer simply cannot handle refreshing rate the position of the sprayer and the spraying any faster than that. So at 7 miles an hour, you're kind of the minimum distance that the GPS can resolve is 1 feet. Okay, and we're trying to spray 10 feet here, so it would take the sprayer only 1 second to go over those 10 feet. So this has to happen really, really fast. So that is something that you have to keep an eye on when trying to do this kind of thing. The only other thing that I saw on the literature about something similar. So in Europe, there was some work done with the sprayers, and they were trying to do something similar, but they were running speeds very, very low because of the same exact reason. I'm gonna say they were running like 2-3 miles an hour, which wouldn't be. Farmers would never use that here because the number of acres that you can cover in an hour would be down drastically. So we tried to do this at 6.5 miles an hour, basically, which was not too bad. So what you see here, just give me a second here. Nope. So after all of these setbacks, we're able to implement this in the field. So as you can see on the top left here, we have the prescription map on the sprayer, and the spray is going down in the field, is spraying based on that prescription map that we create from the drone imagery. So this is not necessarily the same part of the field, so don't try to check it out if the nozzles are on and off. And it's really hard to see if the nozzles are on and off as we're doing that. But at the end, we come up with something like this. The first thing that I saw see this line all the way across here. It's like, oops, somebody didn't line up the sprayer. It seems that between 2 passes, there was a little gap there that was not covered. But these were the as-applied maps that we got from the plots where we did the site-specific weed management. So if we, on top of this, if we overlap our prescription map. And here, just for clarification, the gray is basically 15 gallons per acre. The light green or white color here are basically zeros, where we said that there was no weed, so there's no need to apply herbicide. And if you look, for example, on this first plot here, and you zoom in on that, the sprayer actually did a very good job following the prescription map, even on such a small size cells. There is places where it didn't shut off on the edge there as we would like to, but I much rather have this overlapping on the edge than stopping outside here, stopping before reaching that point. So overall, I was pretty pleased with that. The thing that we're looking though is how do we determine if it is the efficacy of this site-specific weed control. And the way that we're approaching this is we're looking after harvest. And this, sorry, I failed to say this is a corn that was cut for silage. So allows us to do this kind of comparison at the end. So because they remove most of the corn. So what we do at the end, after the harvest, we fly again. And this was done today is Monday, last Wednesday or so. So my graduate students still working on this data set. This is very new. But what we're looking for is on these parts of the field that were not sprayed in the spring, do we have more weeds than on the parts that were sprayed in the spring? And it's really hard to see on this picture, but when we bring it up like an excess green, index from the same imagery, you can see these bright colors which indicates there are some green vegetation there. What is there are some inside of the cells that were not sprayed, but there are some outside as well. So that led to some questions, and I'm not quite sure what the answers for them are. Again, my graduate students is working on this and trying to figure this out. One of the thoughts that I have is that we are using the cell size is too small. So we are missing some sort of overlap between the nozzles maybe. And we are missing to control the weeds that are growing between the row, not just between the row. The other thing that might be going on here is that was high weed pressure in the spring. And although we can see a lot for the small weeds from the camera, I wonder if we were missing very small weeds, and that's causing some of these weeds to grow over the growing season in the middle of the corn. And the other question is, due to high weed pressure in the spring, and we're trying to get all this together and wait for the weather to be just right to do the flights, I wonder if we just waited too long and sprayed too late, which kind of might have affected the efficacy of the spraying as a whole, because you can see weeds outside here as well. So those are some of the questions that my graduate student is working to respond to come up with some explanation for it. Looking toward the future, what we're planning to do, we just got some more funding to continue this work. So one thing that I want to do is to identify if we can find some hardware, and by that I mean drone plus camera, that can improve maybe both the time that takes to collect the imagery and the quality. We're spending an hour and 10 minutes to fly 45, 50 acres. Can we do that faster? And can we collect good resolution imagery? So that's one of the things we'll be looking at. Improve the algorithm to detect the corner rows. So I have, I'm collaborating with a friend of mine that has much more experience on image analysis and things like that. So we might try different approach to identify the corn rows instead of just using the row to determine what is corn, to improve some sort of a classification to detect and separate corn from weeds. And that would help us to solve a little problem that we have sometimes. The corn rows are just, the corn plants are just too big, and they, when you put the buffer around the center line, the tip of the leaves can be outside of the buffer, and they get a count as weeds when they are not. So that's one thing that we're trying to improve. Automate the steps from row detection to our to the prescription map creation. We kind of know the steps that we have to do. Can we kind of wrap all of that into some sort of script, and that we can basically run the imagery through it and get the prescription map. So that's I have a new graduate student working on some of those things. And looking at the economics of this approach, now there are so many things that can affect the economics of it. For example, on some of the results on this, I didn't go into too deep in the results, but at the end, as an average of the 6 plots of site-specific weed control, we didn't spray around 35% of the field. Now, if you think about this, and think about very easy numbers, like if you take 1,000 acres, if you don't have now to spray 350 acres, how much that can save you? But keep in mind that using this approach, you still have to drive up and down the field. So it wouldn't save on the driving per se, but it would save you on the herbicide cost. And because you are applying less water, you would need to stop less. And how you kind of bring all of this together to make economic sense, and and the price that you have to pay for make your sprayer capable of doing such thing. So I have we partner with an economist to look in some of these things. So that's part for work for the future as well. And the other thing that we're looking at is, can we push the sprayer a little harder? Can you spray a little faster? And does it make any difference if you have a cell size that is 1 nozzle, 5 nozzles, or 10 nozzles wide. So we're trying to look in those things to kind of come up with some sort of a recommendation, or when you're doing this, what is the best cell size that provides better efficacy of the application. And with that, again, I thank you the opportunity and your attention for your attention this evening. You have my contact information here. If you have any questions, or later on, feel free to reach out, send me an email. I'll try my best to answer that. And please, I will try to entertain any questions that you might have right now.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor, for your lecture. It was it was a topic that, like I said before to you in private, it's of the interest of so many students. And I think that it's a new look for us that are studying or are interested in this topic about using drones and applying it to automation in machinery. So it's first, congratulations for the lecture, and thank you so much for being here with us. I have a question about it that I'd like to know how was the procedure to choose the drones that were used in the study? What made you?
First of all, if you're trying to spray the weeds with a certain level of precision, you need to make sure that data is being collected with that precision. So that's why we're using our RTK and a PPK drone. So first we use a regular Phantom 4 in the first couple of years that I tried to do this. And we try to do some ground control points, but that becomes kind of hard to do at some point. And a couple of years ago, we were able to purchase the Phantom 4 RTK. And we have done some checks, and even using control points, we are between 2-3 centimeters from those ground control points. So for the kind of thing that we are doing, that is good enough accuracy. And from that, the reason that we went to the larger camera and the larger drone is just because the camera, the Sony camera, is much heavier, and the Matrice 600 Pro can carry that and allow you to do some customization with the gimbal, so you can point the camera all the time down. That's the main reason why we went through with those systems.
Okay, thank you. We have a question in the chat from Professor Giselli. Professor, do you think that in Brazil with straw is even more difficult, mainly to identify the seeding lines due to a possible background or noise?
Oh yeah, definitely. This field, they usually apply beef manure to the field when they are gonna plant corn, and because we are very cold here in the winter, they apply a lot of straw for bedding for the cattle, and that gets brought to the field. And there are points that is really hard to identify the corn row per se, and not just because of the noise in the background, but the fact that there is so much residue there that it holds the corn plants back. So you have these big gaps without any corn plant. Definitely affects the image collection too, especially with the phantom flower where you're flying lower in a sunny day. It reflects a lot of light. It can saturate the images. It becomes sometimes really hard to have a good imagery on those spots. That's a great question.
Okay, thank you. Another one in the chat. Professor, when you don't have a RTK system available on the drone, how does the correction of GPS position can be done?
With the ground control points, we kind of always have the ground control points there just in case as a backup. So what we do, we have this black and orange big lids for plastic buckets, and we put a little wash in the center of that and use a nail to hold all of that on the ground. And then we come down with RTK with the GPS device that has RTK level accuracy, and then we measure the coordinates in each of those points, and we have usually 8 of those ground control points across the field, and we use that when we are stitching the imagery to correct the position of the image. It usually comes down when we compare for the Phantom 4 RTK to 2-3 centimeters level of accuracy. So that's the way that we do when we don't have the drone for RTK. You have to have a GPS device that can provide you that level of accuracy.
Okay, thank you. I have another question. It's kind of silly, but still. Do you think that maybe using the same application, the same methodology on another culture is viable? Something like soy, for example?
It can, and that's where at the beginning I said that we're kind of our approach for the lower hanging fruit, because the corn is kind of as easy crop because it's planted in 30-inch space. There's a lot of space between the rows where the weeds can grow, and you can identify the rows. Soybeans, I believe they're 22 inches apart, but they still can see between the rows and identify the rows. You could apply the same thing for soybeans, sunflowers, definitely, probably dry beans. It would be. I don't think you could do for small grains like wheat, barley, that kind of thing, though.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Any more questions? I don't think there's any more questions in the chat. Okay, I guess this is it. Professor, thank you so much again for your time. It's been really nice to see something so different that we see in classes. So it's very nice. I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, and Guilherme, thank you for the opportunity. And you know, as I mentioned to you earlier, if anybody is looking for opportunities for a master's or PhD in the US, send me an email. We very often have funding for graduate students, and sometimes it's hard to find a good graduate student. So, if it's something that you're interested on and want to take up on that challenge, just reach out to me. Okay.
Great.
Thank you very much, and you guys have a great evening.
Thank you so much. Good evening to you too.
Take care. Bye.
Take care. Deu? Pode fechar.